The alarm klaxons were screaming again, which meant Jackson Reed was having another perfectly normal Tuesday. Red warning lights bathed his cargo hauler's cockpit in that particular shade of, "You're probably going to die," while his ship, the Lucky Break, demonstrated once again why irony was the universe's favorite form of humor. "Come on, baby," he muttered, fingers flying over controls that responded with all the enthusiasm of a dead fish. "Not today. I've got a delivery bonus riding on this run." The nav computer chose that moment to completely give up, displaying a helpful message that roughly translated to, "Good luck. You're on your own." Through the viewport, space twisted in ways that made his eyes water. A gravitational anomaly had appeared from nowhere, which was exactly the kind of impossible thing that happened to him on a regular basis. His ship groaned like an old man getting out of bed, hull plates screaming under stress that shouldn't exist in empty space. The Lucky Break had survived asteroid fields, pirate attacks, and his own questionable piloting skills. But this was different. This felt final. "Mayday, mayday," he broadcast on all frequencies, not really expecting anyone to hear him in the middle of nowhere. "This is cargo hauler Lucky Break, experiencing catastrophic navigation failure," and the anomaly grabbed him. Reality folded itself inside out, and Jackson's stomach decided to relocate somewhere behind his left ear. Stars streaked past like angry wasps, until suddenly they weren't moving at all. Dead ahead loomed a structure that made his brain file a formal complaint. It wasn't a space station. Space stations were utilitarian boxes with docking rings and communication arrays. This was architecture as art, all flowing curves and impossible spirals that seemed to exist in more dimensions than math allowed. Crystalline spires twisted into geometric patterns that hurt to look at directly, while energy fields danced between towers like aurora made solid. "Well," Jackson said conversationally to his unresponsive controls, "I guess we're not in Alliance space anymore." The tractor beam that caught his ship felt almost gentle, which was probably a bad sign. In his experience, people who could afford to be gentle usually had very nasty things planned for later. The Lucky Break was drawn into a hangar bay that could have housed a small city, its walls pulsing with bioluminescent patterns that suggested this wasn't entirely artificial. Construction. As his ship settled onto a landing platform with barely a bump, Jackson took inventory. Emergency rations for 3 days, a sidearm that might annoy someone if he threw it hard enough, and a mouth that had gotten him into more trouble than every other part of his body combined. Standard kit for a cargo pilot, really. The hangar bay had atmosphere, which was considerate. The dozen armed figures surrounding his ship were less so. They moved with predatory grace, wearing armor that seemed to absorb light while somehow still managing to gleam. Each stood nearly 7 feet tall, their faces hidden behind helmets that resembled stylized birds of prey. Jackson activated his ship's external speakers. "Hi there. I don't suppose any of you speak Standard? I'm having a bit of a navigation problem." And the nearest figure raised what was unmistakably a weapon. A beam of coherent energy carved a neat line in the deck, plating inches from his landing ramp. "Right," he sighed. "I guess we're doing this the hard way." The ramp lowered with a hydraulic wheeze, and Jackson stepped out with his hands raised. The armor-clad figures moved to surround him with military precision, energy weapons trained on various parts of his anatomy. Up close, he could see their armor wasn't entirely solid organic components pulsed with their own inner light, suggesting a technology that blended engineering with biology. "Look," he tried again, "I know how this looks. Human shows up uninvited, probably violates about 17 different space treaties, makes everyone nervous. But I swear this is just a really impressive navigation failure. My ship's computer has the spatial awareness of a drunk penguin." The leader of the group made a sound that might have been amusement. Or indigestion. Hard to tell with the helmet. They marched him through corridors that defied conventional architecture. Walls curved and flowed like frozen liquid, surfaces reflecting light in ways that made depth perception a suggestion rather than a rule. Other beings passed them tall, graceful figures with skin that seemed to hold its own inner luminescence and features that were sharp enough to cut glass. They all stopped to stare at the human prisoner, expressions ranging from curiosity to contempt. The throne room doors dissolved like mist at their approach, which was a neat trick that probably cost more than his ship. The chamber beyond was vast enough to have its own weather system, pillars of living crystal pulsing with patterns that suggested a heartbeat. At the far end, elevated on a dais that seemed grown rather than built, sat a figure that made every survival instinct in Jackson's body simultaneously scream and whisper prayers. She was beautiful, the way supernovas were beautiful, spectacular, impossible, and absolutely capable of ending you. Her skin had the pale radiance of pearls, contrasting with hair like liquid mercury that cascaded over shoulders, clad in armor that seemed forged from starlight itself. When she turned her gaze on him, Jackson found himself looking into eyes the color of burning plasma, brilliant blue-white with depths that promised both creation and annihilation. Empress Zephyra, one of his escorts announced, supreme ruler of the Asterian Empire, keeper of the stellar gates, and guardian of— "Yes, thank you, Captain," she interrupted, her voice carrying the kind of authority that could make mountains reconsider their positions. "I'm aware of my titles." The guards forced Jackson to his knees on the obsidian floor, energy restraints materializing around his wrists with a soft hum. The Empress studied him with the intensity of someone trying to decide between execution methods. "A human pilot," she mused, rising from her throne with fluid grace. "It's been some time since one of your kind wandered into our space. Usually they're more careful about where they point their ships. Your Majesty." Jackson began, falling back on half-remembered diplomatic protocols. "I apologize for the intrusion. My navigation systems malfunctioned during a routine cargo run, and—" Silence. The word carried enough force to make him actually stop talking, which was a rare occurrence. She descended the steps slowly, each movement deliberate and hypnotic. "Do you know the penalty for entering Asterian space without permission? I'm guessing it's not a strongly worded letter?" The entire throne room went quiet. Several guards actually shifted nervously, which suggested that joking with their empress was somewhere between inadvisable and suicidal. On the smart decision scale, Zephyra stopped directly in front of him, close enough that he could see flecks of silver in those impossible eyes. "You dare to jest in the face of death?" "It's kind of a human thing," Jackson admitted. "We make jokes when we're terrified. Psychological defense mechanism. Also, you haven't actually said what the penalty is, so I'm hoping it involves community service or a really expensive fine." To his amazement, the corner of her mouth twitched slightly. "How ... peculiar." She began to circle him, and Jackson found himself oddly mesmerized by the way she moved. There was something almost dance-like in her grace, predatory and beautiful in equal measure. The armor she wore was clearly ceremonial, rather than practical, designed to display rather than protect, and he had to admit the aesthetic was impressive. "You know," his mouth said before his brain could stop it, "for someone who's about to execute me, you're really putting on quite a performance." The dramatic entrance, the ominous circling, the whole fear me, mortal atmosphere. "It's very theatrical." She paused mid-step. "Are all humans this casual about their mortality?" "Just the pilots," Jackson replied. "We're used to near-death experiences, though usually they don't involve such ... He gestured vaguely at her with his bound hands. "Impressive executioners." The silence that followed was profound enough to have its own gravitational field. Jackson could feel the weight of alien stares from every corner of the throne room, and he was pretty sure he'd just crossed several lines that most people didn't even know existed. Zephyra moved back into his field of vision, her expression unreadable. Impressive? I mean, objectively speaking, Jackson said, knowing he was already committed to this conversational crash landing. The whole warrior empress aesthetic really works for you. The armor, the silver hair, the eye could vaporize you with a thought vibe. Very intimidating in the best possible way. An elderly advisor stepped forward, his ceremonial robes rustling with indignation. Your Majesty, perhaps we should proceed with the execution before this human embarrasses himself further. Zephyra raised a hand, without looking away from Jackson. Tell me, human pilot, do you fear death? Of course I do, he answered honestly. But I learned a long time ago that fear doesn't change the outcome. Might as well face it with some dignity. Or in my case, apparently, inappropriate humor and questionable compliments. She reached down and gripped his chin, forcing him to meet her gaze. Her touch was surprisingly gentle, though he could sense the strength behind it. Most prisoners beg. They offer wealth, information, servitude, anything to extend their pathetic lives. Yet you make jokes. Would begging help? No. Then I'll stick with jokes. At least I'll die entertained. She released him and stepped back, something shifting in her expression. You intrigue me, Jackson Reed. He blinked in surprise. How do you know my name? Your ship's registration was quite informative, she smiled, and it transformed her face from terrifying to merely devastating. Tell me, what would you do if I decided not to execute you? Jackson's heart hammered against his ribs. Probably say something stupid, such as? And because Jackson Reed had never met a dangerous situation, he couldn't make worse. He looked the supreme ruler of the Asterian Empire dead in her burning eyes and said, You'd make a cute wife. The throne room plunged into absolute silence. Every guard, every noble, every advisor stood frozen as if time itself had stopped. The elderly counselor's mouth opened and closed soundlessly, while one of the younger officers actually dropped his weapon. Zephyra herself went perfectly still, her expression cycling through surprise, confusion, and something else he couldn't identify. For a long moment, they simply stared at each other, the human cargo pilot who just signed his own death warrant, and the alien empress who held his life in her hands. Then, slowly and deliberately, her lips curved into a smile that was equal parts amused and dangerous. Guards, she said, never breaking eye contact with Jackson. Clear the throne room. My lady, the elderly advisor stammered. Surely you don't mean... Everyone out. Now. Her tone brooked no argument. Within moments, the vast chamber emptied, soldiers and courtiers filing out with backward glances and hushed whispers. The massive doors sealed behind them, with a sound like fate itself clicking into place. Jackson found himself alone with the Empress, still kneeling, still shackled, and definitely still in mortal danger, despite the smile playing at her lips. Do you know, she said conversationally, that in 3 centuries of rule, no one has ever said anything remotely that audacious to me? I'm honored to be your first. Jackson offered weakly. She laughed a sound like silver bells mixed with distant thunder. You humans are so small, so fragile, so ... amusing. She touched a control on her throne, and his energy shackles dissipated. Stand, as Jackson rose carefully, working feeling back into his limbs. Empress Zephyra studied him with those impossible eyes. The vast throne room felt even more alien, now that they were alone. The bioluminescent patterns in the walls, pulsing in rhythm with his accelerated heartbeat. You called me cute, she said, the word sounding foreign on her tongue. Explain this concept. Jackson rubbed his wrists, trying to organize his thoughts. It means attractive in an approachable way. Not just beautiful or intimidating, but something that makes you want to smile. Though I'm realizing now that calling the supreme ruler of an interstellar empire cute might have been culturally insensitive. And wife? She moved closer, and without the guards present, he became acutely aware of how alone they were. I understand human pair bonding concepts, but why would you suggest such a thing? Heat rose to Jackson's face. It was a joke. A very stupid joke. When human males see an attractive female, sometimes we say things like that. It's not meant to be taken seriously, but you do find me attractive. It wasn't a question. He gestured vaguely at her. Look at you. You're like if someone weaponized beauty and gave it an empire to run. Even by human standards, you single quotes, double quotes, choose your next words very carefully, she warned, though he could see amusement dancing in those stellar eyes. Remarkable, he finished. Terrifyingly remarkable. She circled him again, but this time it felt less like a predator stalking prey, and more like of evaluation. You interest me. Jackson Reed, she said, using his full name for the first time. In all my years, I have conquered worlds, commanded fleets, crushed rebellions. I have been feared, respected, obeyed without question. But no one has ever looked at me and thought cute wife. To be fair, I'm sure plenty of people thought it. They were just smart enough not to say it out loud. Perhaps there was something in her voice, and a note that might have been loneliness if supreme alien empresses felt such things. Or perhaps they saw only the ruler, not the woman beneath. As she spoke, Jackson found himself studying her more closely, seeing past the armor and authority to something more complex underneath. The way she held herself suggested someone who'd never known what it was like to be seen as anything other than a force of nature. So, he said carefully, what happens now? Am I still scheduled for execution, or has my complete lack of survival instincts earned me a reprieve? She stopped in front of him, a decision clearly made. Your ship is destroyed beyond repair. Your government believes you dead, and you have seen the inner workings of the Asterian imperial palace. Her smile was sharp as a blade. I cannot simply release you. Prison, then? Of a sort. She moved to her throne and activated a control panel. You will remain here as my cultural advisor. You will not attempt to escape or communicate with the outside. You will dine with me each evening, and you will continue to amuse me with your human perspectives. And if I refuse, then you'll discover why I'm called Empress rather than diplomat. Jackson considered his options, which were notably limited. Do I at least get decent quarters? Because if I'm going to be a prisoner, I'd prefer to be a comfortable one. You are not a prisoner, she corrected. You are my guest. There is a difference. What kind of difference? Guests get better food. She touched another control, and the throne room doors unsealed. A single guard entered, a tall Asterian with insignia that suggested high rank. Captain Moran, escort our guest to the diplomatic quarters in the Eastern Tower. Ensure he has everything required for comfort. The captain's eyes widened slightly. The diplomatic quarters, Your Majesty? Did I stutter? No, Your Majesty. At once, as Jackson moved to follow the captain, Zephyr's voice stopped him. Oh, and Jackson. He turned back to find her watching him with that unreadable expression. The next time you feel compelled to comment on my suitability as a spouse, she said, her tone light, but her eyes intense. Remember that Asterian marriage customs involve significantly more ceremony than your human traditions. Noted. Jackson said weakly, Good. I'll see you at dinner. Try not to propose before then. As Captain Moran led him from the throne room, Jackson caught a glimpse of Empress Xavier settling back onto her throne, a small smile still playing at her lips. The doors sealed between them, leaving him to wonder exactly what he'd gotten himself into. You realize, Captain Moran said, as they walked through corridors that seemed to pulse with their own heartbeat, that you're the first outsider in recorded history to leave Her Majesty's presence alive after such an audience. Lucky me, Jackson muttered. Indeed, The captain gave him a look that might have been sympathy. When an Asterian locks the doors, it means they've found something worth keeping. A chill ran down Jackson's spine that had nothing to do with the alien atmosphere. And what happens to things she keeps? That, Captain Naran said with something like pity, depends entirely on how well you continue to interest her. As they walked deeper into the Imperial Palace, Jackson couldn't shake the feeling that his joke about marriage might have been more prophetic than he'd intended. The most powerful ruler in known space had just claimed him as her personal guest, and the way she'd smiled when he'd called her cute ... he was either the luckiest human alive or the most doomed. Probably both. The diplomatic quarters in the Eastern Tower redefined Jackson's understanding of luxury. The walls seemed alive, shifting between deep space black and nebula purple with subtle bioluminescent patterns that responded to his presence. Furniture adjusted to his physiology with disturbing accuracy, while the bathroom featured technology that made him feel like a caveman discovering fire. The balcony offered a breathtaking view of the Asterian capital, suspended in space, a city-sized construct of flowing architecture and impossible engineering. Ships darted between crystalline spires like metallic fish, while energy bridges connected floating platforms where Asterians went about their daily lives with the casual grace of beings who had never known gravity as a limitation. When evening approached, Captain Moran returned with formal attire that somehow managed to accommodate human anatomy while incorporating Asterian aesthetics. The outfit felt like wearing liquid shadow, form-fitting but comfortable in ways that suggested advanced materials science. "The Empress expects you at sunset," Moran informed him. "Do not be late. Her Majesty values punctuality. Any other survival tips?" Jackson asked, adjusting the unfamiliar collar. "Don't mention the war with the Helian Confederacy. Don't ask about her family. And whatever you do, don't comment on Asterian mating rituals unless directly asked. There's a story there, isn't there?" Moran's expression suggested there were several stories, all of them ending badly. "Just be yourself." It seemed to work yesterday. The dining chamber was intimate compared to the throne room, a circular space with transparent walls, offering a panoramic view of space. A table that seemed grown from a single crystal dominated the center, set for two with utensils that were clearly designed for Asterian physiology but had been modified for human use. Empress Zephyra was already there, and Jackson's breath caught in his throat. Gone was the battle armor. She wore a gown that seemed woven from starlight itself, shifting between midnight black and deep purple with their movements. Her mercury hair was arranged in an elegant style that exposed the graceful line of her neck, while jewelry that pulsed with its own inner light adorned her throat and wrists. She looked less like a conquering empress and more like something out of mythology. "You're staring," she observed without looking up from the holographic report she was reviewing. "You're stunning," Jackson replied before his brain could engage its filter. "I mean, that's different from this morning." She dismissed the hologram with a gesture and finally looked at him. "You clean up adequately yourself, human. The formal wear suits you better than I expected. Thanks. It's very comfortable. Advanced materials? Bioresponsive fabric. It adjusts to the wearer's needs while maintaining structural integrity." She gestured to the chair across from her. "Sit. We have much to discuss." As Jackson took his seat, servo units began bringing dishes. The food was unlike anything he'd encountered, colors and textures that challenged perception, but surprisingly palatable. One dish tasted like honey mixed with electricity, while another reminded him of chocolate infused with starlight. "So," he said, sampling something that seemed to change flavor with each bite, "is this where you interrogate me about alliance trade routes and military secrets? Do you have any worth knowing? I'm a cargo pilot who hauls protein paste and recycled atmosphere scrubbers. My security clearance wouldn't get me into a public library. She smiled at that, the first genuine expression of amusement he'd seen from her. Then we can dispense with pretense. Tell me about your world instead. Earth? What do you want to know? Everything. Your cultures, your conflicts, your art. How a species that's barely achieved interstellar travel has survived in a galaxy full of predators. Jackson found himself relaxing despite the circumstances, mostly through stubborn persistence and an alarming willingness to make friends with anything that doesn't immediately try to eat us. We're very good at adaptation, yet you couldn't adapt your way out of my throne room yesterday, didn't I? I'm sitting here having dinner instead of being space dust. Her smile widened. A fair point, though your methods were unconventional. They talked for hours, the meal extending far beyond its prescribed courses. Zephyra proved to be a surprisingly engaged listener, asking pointed questions about human history, philosophy, and social structures. Her curiosity seemed genuine, not the calculated interest of an intelligence gatherer. In return, she shared glimpses of Asterian civilization, a culture that had evolved from nomadic stellar travelers into a sophisticated empire spanning dozens of systems. They valued artistic achievement as much as military conquest, viewing both as expressions of excellence. Your species fascinates me, she said as servo units cleared the table. So fragile, yet you've spread across local space like a persistent organism. You adapt through cooperation rather than domination. Not all of us are cooperative, Jackson pointed out. We have our share of conquerors too, but not like us. She rose, moving to the transparent wall, overlooking the capital. We take what we desire through strength. It's our nature. Is that why you kept me? Jackson joined her at the window. Because you wanted a pet human to study? She turned to him, those plasma-bright eyes unreadable. Would that bother you? Depends on the accommodations. Do pets get hazard pay? Instead of answering, she reached out and adjusted the collar of his outfit, the gesture unexpectedly intimate. You're not afraid of me anymore. I'm terrified of you, Jackson corrected. I just hide it well? No. Her voice was soft, almost wondering. Fear has a scent, a taste in the air. You were afraid yesterday in the throne room, but not now. Why? Jackson considered the question. Why wasn't he afraid? This woman could obliterate him with a thought, commanded fleets that could sterilize worlds, ruled an empire built on conquest. Yet standing here, close enough to feel the warmth radiating from her skin, he felt double quotes, maybe because you're not just the Empress right now, he said finally. You're Zephyra, having dinner with someone who thinks you're remarkable. She stepped closer, and he became acutely aware of their height difference, the way she towered over him, her presence filling his entire field of vision. Remarkable? Terrifyingly so. His voice came out rougher than intended. Careful, Jackson. Flattery can be dangerous with my kind. Everything's dangerous with your kind. Might as well enjoy the conversation before you remember you're supposed to be intimidating. She laughed that silver bell sound that seemed to transform the very air around them. What makes you think I've forgotten? Before he could answer, the dining chamber's doors chimed softly. Zephyra's expression shifted, the Empress reasserting herself over the woman. Enter. An elderly Asterian with elaborate ceremonial robes entered, his face bearing the kind of weathered dignity that spoke of long service and hard-won wisdom. His silver-streaked hair was arranged in the complex patterns that denoted high rank, while his pale eyes held a mixture of wisdom and worry. Your Majesty, he said with a formal bow. Forgive the interruption, but urgent matters require your attention. Minister Korath, Zephyra's tone carried both affection and mild irritation. What crisis threatens the Empire this time? Korath's gaze flickered to Jackson, clearly uncomfortable discussing state matters in front of an outsider. Perhaps we might speak privately? Jackson is my cultural advisor. Speak freely. The minister's eyebrows rose slightly, but he continued. Intelligence reports suggest unusual activity in the Proxima sector. Ships moving in patterns that don't match standard trade routes or military patrols. Pirates? Unknown. But the timing concerns me, coming so soon after the Helian Confederacy's latest diplomatic overtures. Jackson watched the exchange with growing interest. The way Korath's expression tightened when he mentioned the Confederacy, the slight tension in Zephorah's posture, there were layers of history here he didn't understand. Double patrols in that sector, Zephyrah decided, and increased surveillance on Confederacy communications. If they're planning something, I want to know about it. Of course, Your Majesty. Korath bowed again, but his eyes lingered on Jackson with obvious disapproval. Will there be anything else? That will be all. After the minister left, silence settled over the dining chamber. Zephyrah stared out at the stars, her expression troubled. The Helian Confederacy? Jackson asked carefully. Our neighbors to the Spinward border. We've been at peace for nearly a decade, but it's an uneasy peace built on mutual exhaustion rather than trust. Sounds familiar. Humans have a talent for those kinds of relationships. She glanced at him, curiosity replacing worry. How do your people handle such situations? Usually through a combination of diplomacy, trade agreements, and very carefully worded treaties. We've learned that it's easier to make money from your enemies than to keep fighting them. An interesting perspective. Asterians tend to prefer more definitive solutions. Conquest, you mean? When necessary. She moved back to the table, her fingers trailing over the crystal surface. But perhaps there are other ways. You said humans adapt through cooperation. How? For the next hour, they discussed human diplomatic history, the alliances, the trade compacts, the slow process of turning enemies into partners through mutual benefit. Zephyrah listened intently, asking questions that revealed a sharp political mind behind the imperial authority. Your species has survived by making yourselves useful, she mused. Not through strength or fear, but through value. It's worked so far. Though I have to admit, our track record with hostile alien empresses is pretty limited. I am not hostile, she protested, then caught his expression. To you, I am not hostile to you. What am I then? Really? The question hung in the air between them. Zephyrah studied him with those impossible eyes, and for a moment he saw something vulnerable beneath the imperial mask. I don't know, she admitted. You're not a prisoner. You're not quite a guest. You're certainly not a traditional advisor. She paused, seeming to choose her words carefully. You're something new. Good new or bad new? That remains to be seen. She activated a control panel, and soft chimes indicated the evening's formal conclusion. Return to your quarters. Tomorrow, I'll show you more of the capital. Perhaps seeing our society will help you understand what we're trying to protect. As Jackson moved toward the exit, her voice stopped him. Oh? And Jackson? He turned back. Minister Korath disapproves of you. He believes you're a dangerous influence on imperial policy. And what do you believe? Her smile was enigmatic. I believe he's right. Sleep well. The walk back to his quarters gave Jackson time to process the evening's events. The way she touched his collar, the genuine interest in human culture, the moment of vulnerability when she'd admitted uncertainty about his role, it all pointed to something more complex than simple imperial curiosity. Captain Moran was waiting in the corridor outside his quarters, her expression unreadable. How was dinner? Educational. Your Empress is more complicated than she lets on. They always are. A word of advice? Moran stepped closer, lowering her voice. Minister Korath has served the imperial family for 6 decades. He survived the succession wars, the Confederacy conflict, and 3 different coups. He doesn't disapprove of people lightly. Meaning? Meaning he sees something in you that concerns him. And if you concern him, you should probably be worried. Are you warning me or threatening me? I'm trying to keep you alive, Moran said bluntly. Her Majesty is fond of you. That makes you valuable, but it also makes you a target. The imperial court has ways of dealing with inconvenient influences. Jackson felt a chill that had nothing to do with the ambient temperature. What kind of ways? The kind that look like accidents. Moran's expression softened slightly. You seem like a decent human. Reed, don't let your mouth write checks your body can't cash. As she walked away, Jackson entered his quarters with considerably more to think about. Through the balcony windows, the Asterian capital glittered like a jeweled web, beautiful and alien and full of hidden dangers. He'd crashed into restricted space, looking for nothing more than a safe route home. Instead, he'd found an empress who laughed at his jokes, a political situation more complex than he'd imagined, and the growing realization that his casual flirtation might have consequences far beyond his understanding. Tomorrow, Zephyra would show him her world. Tonight, he could only hope he'd live long enough to see it. The stars wheeled overhead, indifferent to human concerns, while somewhere in the depths of the imperial palace, forces he couldn't comprehend were already beginning to move. His joke about marriage had been prophetic in ways he couldn't have imagined, but whether it would be a romantic comedy or a tragedy remained to be seen. As sleep finally claimed him, Jackson's last coherent thought was that he'd definitely gotten himself into something far more complicated than a simple navigation error. The question was whether his talent for inappropriate humor would be enough to navigate the dangerous currents of imperial politics. Somehow, he doubted it would be that easy. The 3rd morning of Jackson's captivity began with an explosion that rattled the crystal windows of his quarters. He jerked awake to find the palace's emergency lighting casting everything in amber hues, while distant alarms wailed like wounded animals dot through his balcony windows. He could see smoke rising from one of the lower spires, its elegant architecture now scarred by whatever had caused the blast. Ships were moving in patterns that suggested military response rather than routine traffic. Captain Moran burst through his door without ceremony, her usual composed demeanor replaced by urgent efficiency. Get dressed. Now. The Empress wants you in the command center. What happened? Jackson asked, pulling on the clothes she'd brought more practical attire than his usual diplomatic wear. Sabotage. Someone planted explosives in the primary communications array. Moran's expression was grim. It's the same signature as the attacks on the border stations last month. They moved through corridors that hummed with activity. Palace guards rushed past in full combat armor, while technicians worked frantically at control panels that sparked with damaged systems. The elegant bioluminescent patterns in the walls had shifted to martial reds and golds, transforming the artistic architecture into something that felt distinctly military. The command center was a sphere of controlled chaos. Holographic displays showed fleet movements, communication intercepts, and damage assessments from across the empire. At the center of it all stood Empress Zephyra, back in her battle armor, directing the response with the kind of authority that made gravity seem negotiable. Increase patrols in sectors 7 through 12, she was saying to a group of officers. And I want every ship movement in Confederacy space monitored. If they so much as adjust course by a degree, I want to know about it. She looked up as Jackson approached, her plasma-bright eyes carrying a different kind of fire than he'd seen before. This wasn't the woman who'd shared dinner and philosophical discussions. This was the Empress who'd conquered star systems. Jackson, good. I need your perspective on something. She led him to a tactical display showing intercepted communications, strings of code that scrolled past too quickly for him to follow. Our analysts believe these transmissions are coordinating the sabotage efforts. The pattern suggests off-world involvement. You think the Confederacy is behind this? I think someone wants me to think the Confederacy is behind this. She manipulated the display, highlighting certain communication nodes. The signatures are too obvious, the timing too convenient. In my experience, when enemies want to hide their involvement, they're usually more subtle. An officer approached with a datapad, his expression troubled. Your Majesty, Minister Korai requests an immediate council meeting. He says the situation demands a military response. Zephyra's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. Tell the minister I'll convene the council when I'm ready, not before. As the officer departed, she turned back to Jackson. You mentioned yesterday that humans prefer cooperation to conquest. How do you handle sabotage? Carefully, he replied. Usually by figuring out who benefits from the chaos before deciding how to respond. Knee-jerk reactions tend to play into the saboteur's hands. Wise advice. She studied the tactical display with renewed focus. Someone wants to provoke a conflict. The question is whether they're trying to start a war or prevent one. Before Jackson could respond, the command center's doors dilated to admit Minister Korath, accompanied by a figure Jackson hadn't seen before, a tall Asterian with the kind of scars that spoke of serious combat experience. His armor bore the insignia of high military rank, while his pale eyes held the cold calculation of someone who viewed everything in terms of strategic advantage. Your Majesty, Korath began without preamble, the council is assembled and waiting. General Vex has urgent intelligence that requires immediate action. The general stepped forward with military precision. Empress, our deep space sensors have detected Confederacy fleet movements near the Kepler Junction. 3 battle groups, moving in coordination. Combined with these sabotage attacks, the intent is clear. Is it? Zephyra's tone carried dangerous undercurrents. What intent would that be, General? Preparation for invasion. They're probing our defenses while weakening our infrastructure. Classic pre-war strategy. Jackson watched the exchange with growing unease. Something about General Vex's certainty bothered him. The way the man presented complex intelligence as simple fact. The timing of his appearance right after the sabotage. And you recommend? Zephyra asked. Immediate mobilization. Strike the Confederacy fleets before they can complete their preparations. Show them that Asterian space remains inviolate. That would start a war, Jackson said before he could stop himself. The general's cold gaze fixed on him with obvious disdain. And you are? Jackson Reed, cultural advisor to Her Majesty. Ah yes, the pet human. Vex's smile was sharp as broken glass. Perhaps you should leave military strategy to those with actual experience in such matters. Perhaps, Jackson replied evenly, but I do have experience in not starting wars by accident. And everything you're describing sounds like someone wants you to attack first. The general's expression darkened. Are you suggesting? I'm suggesting that maybe we should figure out who's really behind the sabotage before we start shooting at people. Silence fell over the command center. Officers glanced nervously between the general and the human who just challenged military orthodoxy. While Minister Korath's disapproval was practically visible, Zephyra studied both men with those impossible eyes. General Vex, return to your fleet. Maintain current alert status, but take no aggressive action without my direct authorization. Your Majesty, I must protest. You may protest all you wish. From your ship, the dismissal was absolute. Vex saluted with mechanical precision and departed, but not before shooting Jackson a look that promised future unpleasantness. After the general left, Korath approached the throne with obvious concern. Your Majesty, perhaps it would be wise to reconsider the human's presence during sensitive briefings. His ... Perspectives may not align with imperial interests. His perspectives, Zephyra said coolly, may be exactly what imperial interests require. Dismissed, Minister. Korath's expression suggested he had more to say, but he bowed and withdrew, leaving Jackson alone with the Empress and a room full of nervous technicians. Was either very brave or very stupid, she observed. Probably both. But something about your general bothers me. Oh? She moved closer, close enough that he could see his reflection in those stellar eyes. What about him bothers you? He's too eager for war. In my experience, the people most excited about fighting are usually the ones who profit from it somehow. She was quiet for a long moment, considering his words. Around them, the command center hummed with activity as technicians worked to repair the damage from the morning's sabotage. There's something you should know, she said finally, her voice low enough that only he could hear. General Vex commands the largest faction in the military. His supporters believe the Empire has grown soft under my rule. And has it? I prefer diplomacy to devastation when possible. Some see this as weakness. Jackson felt pieces of a larger puzzle beginning to fall into place. The sabotage, what if it's not the Confederacy at all? What if it's someone inside your own empire trying to force your hand? Her eyes widened slightly. That would be treason of the highest order. It would also be effective. Create a crisis, present a simple solution, and when things go badly, blame the leader for being too cautious. Before she could respond, alarms began wailing again. A technician called out from his station, "Your Majesty." Emergency transmission from the Border Patrol. The main display shifted to show a haggard Asterian officer, his uniform scorched and his expression desperate. "This is Captain Thera of the patrol vessel Star's Edge. We're under attack by unknown vessels." "Repeat, we are under attack." The transmission dissolved into static, and weapons fire before cutting out entirely. "Location?" Zephyra demanded. "Grid 77 Alpha. The neutral zone border. Dispatch rescue vessels immediately. And get me General Vex." As the command center erupted into coordinated chaos, Jackson found himself pulled aside by a gentle hand on his arm. He turned to see a young Asterian woman in servant's attire, her expression urgent. "Please," she whispered, "I need to speak with you. Privately. It's about the attacks." Jackson glanced at Zephyra, who was deep in conference with her officers. The woman tugged at his sleeve insistently. "I'm Sira," she continued. "I work in the palace kitchens, but I see things, hear things. The attacks, they're not what they seem." Against his better judgment, Jackson followed her into a side corridor that ran parallel to the command center. The walls here were utilitarian rather than artistic, suggesting service passages hidden behind the palace's elegant facade. "What do you mean, not what they seem?" Sira looked around nervously before speaking. "I prepare meals for the senior staff. Last week, I overheard General Vex talking with someone about accelerating the timeline. They mentioned creating incidents to justify mobilization. Did you report this?" "To who?" "Vex commands half the military, and Minister Korath thinks any criticism of the general is treason." She grabbed his arm. "But you have the Empress's ear. She might listen to you." Before Jackson could respond, the corridor filled with armed figures in stealth gear. They moved with professional precision, weapons trained on both him and Sira with steady hands. "Jackson Reed," one of them said, voice distorted by equipment. "You're coming with us." "I don't think so." He stepped protectively in front of Sira, though he had no idea how to protect anyone from soldiers with advanced weaponry. "This isn't a request." The speaker gestured, and two of his companions moved forward. "Our employer wants to discuss your future with the Empress. Let me guess, General Vex? The General feels your influence is detrimental to Imperial security. He's prepared to offer you safe passage off-world in exchange for your departure. And if I refuse?" The soldier's helmet tilted slightly. Then your departure will be less comfortable. Sierra pressed something small and hard into Jackson's hand, some kind of communication device. Tell her, she whispered. Tell her what I said. The soldiers moved with practiced efficiency. One moment Jackson was standing in a palace corridor. The next he was being hustled through service passages toward what he assumed was a very unpleasant conversation with someone who decided he was expendable. As they moved deeper into the palace's hidden infrastructure, he activated the device Sierra had given him. It was a simple communicator, already tuned to a specific frequency. Zephyra, he whispered, hoping the signal would reach her. It's Jackson. I think we were right about the sabotage. General Vex. A weapon butt to his kidney cut off the transmission and sent him sprawling. The soldiers hauled him upright with professional indifference. No communications, his captor said. The general wants to speak with you personally. They emerged into a hangar bay Jackson hadn't seen before, smaller and less elegant than the main docking facilities. A single ship waited there, sleek, military, and clearly designed for stealth rather than comfort. General Vex stood beside the vessel, no longer wearing the facade of loyal service. His expression was cold, calculating, and entirely focused on the problem Jackson represented. Mr. Reed, he said conversationally, I'm afraid your visit to our empire must come to an end. Funny thing about visits? Jackson replied, testing the restraints his captors had placed on his wrists. Usually the host lets the guest decide when to leave. The Empress is not thinking clearly. Your presence has compromised her judgment, made her weak when strength is required. Vex began walking slowly around him, much as Zephyra had done during their first meeting. But where she had been predatory grace, he was cold evaluation. So you decided to fix the problem by staging attacks and blaming the Confederacy? Vex paused. You're more perceptive than I credited. Yes, the sabotage was necessary to demonstrate the consequences of weak leadership. When the Confederacy responds to our justified retaliation, the Empire will see that only military strength can protect us. And you'll be there to provide that strength. I serve the Empire's true interests, not the whims of a ruler who's forgotten what made us strong. The hangar bay's main doors suddenly dilated, admitting a squad of palace guards in full battle armor. At their head strode Empress Zephyra, her plasma eyes blazing with fury that made the air itself seem to crackle. General Vex, she said, her voice carrying the kind of authority that could make stars change course. Release him, now, Your Majesty. Vex's tone remained respectfully neutral, as if kidnapping the Empress's advisor was standard military procedure. I was simply discussing Mr. Reed's departure with him. Surely you can see that his influence undermines imperial security. What undermines imperial security is treason. She moved forward with that liquid grace, but now it carried the promise of violence. Did you really think I wouldn't discover your involvement in the sabotage? I serve the Empire. You serve yourself. Her guards spread out, weapons trained on Vex's soldiers. Sierra brought me very interesting intelligence about your private conversations. Combined with Mr. Reed's insights about the timing of these attacks, double quotes, Vex's composure finally cracked. You would trust the word of a kitchen servant and an alien over a general who served this empire for decades? I trust evidence. And the evidence suggests you've been playing a very dangerous game with imperial lives. The tension in the hangar bay stretched taut as both sides calculated odds and angles. Jackson found himself at the center of what was rapidly becoming a military standoff, with no clear idea of how to prevent it from turning bloody. Your Majesty, Vex said carefully, perhaps we should discuss this privately. Away from outside influences. The only thing we need to discuss is the terms of your surrender. That's when everything went wrong. Vex's hand moved to his sidearm in a motion too fast for Jackson to follow. Energy discharge lit up the hangar bay as both sides opened fire simultaneously. Zephyra dove toward Jackson, her armor's defensive systems crackling as weapons fire tracked her movement. She reached him just as the restraints on his wrists dissolved under her touch, her face inches from his as they took cover behind a cargo container. "Are you hurt?" she demanded. "Just my pride. And possibly my survival instincts." He looked into those impossible eyes and saw something that made his heart stutter. "You came for me." "Of course I did." Her hand cupped his face with surprising gentleness, despite the chaos around them. "You're mine." The simple statement carried layers of meaning that would have to be explored later. Right now, energy bolts were carving chunks out of their cover, and Vex's voice could be heard coordinating his soldiers' movements. "We need to get out of here," Zephyra said, checking her sidearm's charge. "My guards are good, but Vex has been planning this for months. He'll have contingencies." As if summoned by her words, the hangar bay's lights cut out, plunging them into near total darkness, broken only by the glow of energy weapons and emergency lighting. In the confusion, Jackson heard Vex's voice, closer than before. "Your Majesty, this doesn't have to end badly. Send the human away, return to traditional policies, and we can forget this unfortunate misunderstanding." "The only misunderstanding," Zephyra called back, "is your assumption that I would negotiate with traitors? Then you've chosen your path." Vex's tone hardened. "And sealed your fate." The explosion that followed wasn't large, but it was precisely placed. The hangar bay's structural supports groaned as the blast destabilized the entire section, while emergency systems wailed warnings about hull breaches and atmospheric loss. In the chaos that followed falling debris, emergency lighting, and the sound of combat, Jackson felt Zephyra's hand grip his with desperate strength. "Stay close," she whispered. "Whatever happens next, stay close to me." As they prepared to move through a palace that had suddenly become a battlefield, Jackson realized that his joke about marriage had been more prescient than he'd known. For better or worse, he was bound to this remarkable, terrifying woman who'd risked everything to save him. The question was whether either of them would survive long enough to explore what that meant.